Okay. So, AP Euro students, this is for you. This is a quick review of the Age of Exploration. I'm not going to go into uh, too much detail. I'm not going to talk all of it. I'm going to be mainly talking about Portugal and Spain today. So let's get started. The Age of Exploration, you can look and see in your textbook what some of those causes were for that. But one thing that happens, we have Portugal, which is geographically situated where it makes sense for them to start exploring. They're at the far western edge of the Iberian Peninsula, which is the far western edge of Europe, and they're close to Africa. So Prince Henry the Navigator starts to encourage them to trade. What he wants, in fact, is initially he's not looking, let's get to India, right? He's looking, let's start trading with Africa. He would love to get to India, but he's not sure they really know how. So he's going to start increasing trade with Africa, and they've got ships that are getting a little bit better, and so they're going to start sailing down that western coast of Africa. And every time they get someplace a little bit farther, they go back and they make contact. And the real things he's looking for are gold, ivory, and slaves. Okay, so the slave trade, of course, is not nearly as big as it will become, but he is looking to bring slaves into the course of a half century. So they'll bring 140, 150,000 slaves to Europe. Most of the slaves will wind up in Portugal and Spain. At any rate, so they go down there and they keep going down there, and eventually they'll get around an edge and start to think about, where it goes. Then they realize they're not all there, but gradually over time, they start to get better at sailing. At first, it was a very scary undertaking. They didn't want to get too far from shore, but they kind of fuel their way along the coast of Africa. And eventually they start to realize, if we can go around this somehow, we probably can get to India, to Asia. And then that idea really comes, then we can undercut the spice market that as far as Europe is concerned, it's mostly Venice that is able to do that, is able to get those spices and turn a very handsome profit. So they're thinking maybe we can undercut that and do that. So they've been building up their trade with Africa, but now this idea is planted that they can go to Asia, to India, or India specifically, but Asia in general. They just have a vague idea. And so it's Bartolomeo Diaz in 1487, he gets around the Cape of Good Hope, right? That's that southern tip of Africa. And so now, it feels like it's only a matter of time. And other people who are competing with other kingdoms that are competing with them now feel the pressure. One thing, they're not sure how far it is and exactly how to get there, but they're starting to do that. So that, of course, in some kind of contact with the Ottomans. So I'm assuming I may have to explain that again because my internet connection is unstable, is what it's telling me, and they're going to try reconnecting. But it is the internet, so it can be. There we go. Hopefully, it's back. At any rate, Venice is hogging that it has what's left of the spice market. Columbus is from Genoa, Italy. He gets Spain to fund him, and he's convinced them, hey, we can sail across the Atlantic, and now that we have ships we think can pull it off, we can sail around the Atlantic. It's not going to be that far, and we'll hit India. Obviously, we all know how that turns out. It was a lot farther than you thought, and lying in between Europe and Asia was, of course, the Americas. So Columbus is going to stumble across those. And he announces, of course, to the Spanish rulers that he's hit India. He thinks he has, right? He calls it the Indies because, he doesn't know. Maybe there's more than one Indian. But he announces that he's reached Asia. He's reached the goal. And so now Portugal, it becomes urgent that they get there because it's going to be a question of who managed to monopolize this, grab a monopoly so they can do the trade with Europe. So Vasco da Gama is going to reach India, the real one, in 1498, 6 years after Columbus's first voyage. So he's going to head at Calcutta, and he has the unpleasant surprise realizing that India doesn't want to trade with them. For one thing, India doesn't really need to. They have well-established trade ties with Arabs, and that means Arabs who are part of that Ottoman Empire, right? So that'll disrupt that trade flow, and India is like, why should we have a good thing going? Why should we disrupt that? But also, and more importantly, Portugal doesn't have anything they want. When Portugal arrives, yours is garbage. But they force their way in, at gunpoint. Essentially, the one thing they do have is guns. To give you an idea why this is so desirable for Portugal, the value of the spices that Da Gama brings back on his first trip with his load of spices from India, the value of that load is 60 times what it cost for the entire trip, entire expedition. So think that. I mean, you can imagine the profits are astronomical. I mean, imagine if you invest something where for every dollar you put into it, you're going to make $59 in profit minus your cost, right? So every dollar you put in, you get $60 back. That is mind-blowing, right? So you can see why it's so important to them. So let's break this down. So Portugal, what happens is they establish those factories, those trading posts along the west coast of Africa, and then they force their way into trading, into the trading system or network on the east coast of Africa, the Swahili coast. Force their way in there again at gunpoint, and then force their way into trade and in India. They're going to continue moving farther east. They will eventually, of course, force their way into what is now Malaysia or Indonesia, but the Spice Islands, and they will form colonies there, and they will try and push their way into a little bit into Japan and all these different places out there. And parts of China, Macau, et cetera, they'll have this vast Indian trading network. Asian trading network, we should say, African and Asian trading network. And then Spain, of course, gets the Americas. They are going to, will address separately their conquest of the Americas, but they're, of course, going to start their colonies there, which they're going to exploit for their wealth, particularly not really creating settler colonies or any of their trading networks, trading outposts, where there'll be a few Portuguese there to kind of mind their interests, but they're not going large numbers to live there. The Spanish, it's going to change. It's going to be these settler colonies where you're going to have relatively of Spaniards coming in. They will be outnumbered by the people they're conquering. And we'll talk about the biological impacts of the Columbian exchange, et cetera. But also Spain has not given up its dream of being able to get into that Asian trade. They will, with Magellan, get around the southern tip, the Cape of Magellan, or around the southern tip of South America, and head west to hit Asia that way. And Spain, obviously, because it's much farther than they anticipate, but they do manage to get the Philippines, get control of the Philippines, named it King Philip, of course. And so they have, albeit a much smaller than the Portuguese and then their own holdings in the Americas, they do have a foothold in Asia anyway. And so that's the early stages of this age of exploration where Spain and Portugal are going to dominate. I'm not going to make a video about the conquest of the Aztecs or the Incas. I will post one. There are numerous that are out there, and I'll let you. I'll post a link to those. But then I will make another one where I'll talk about kind of that second stage of European exploration, where the English, the Dutch, et cetera, get involved. And we'll talk a little bit about the Columbian exchange, et cetera, as well. So there you go for now. And I'm sure you're reading what you should be reading. All right.